This is the 6th in the series of short videos covering the Chemical Risk Assessment module. And this is going to be part 1 of 3, where we have a look at the workflow within the Chemical Risk Assessment form and the buttons that enable us to effect that workflow in each of the workflow steps. In this video, we'll concentrate on the form in the pending Supervisor Approval status, or step. But before we do that, we need to have a look at how it gets to that step in the first place. Anybody with access to this module can request a risk assessment, and what they will be doing is clicking on the New Record button. As the person requesting the risk assessment, you need to select your name from the list of risk assessors. It's a drop-down list. You don't have to scroll through the list. You can type your surname, your first name, it will find them, and you can select them from there. The supervisor is the person to whom you're going to send this in order to reach that supervisor approval step. And again, a drop-down list, you can select the name of the supervisor. So once you've completed all of the fields, the mandatory ones marked with the asterisks at a minimum, and all of the others that you need to, what you'll do is you'll click on the Submit for Approval button, and this will then send it to the pending Supervisor Approval step. Notifications will go out. These are things you don't have to worry about. They will happen automatically. What we'll do now is close down this document and open up the one that we had a look at in a previous video. I've now opened the document we were dealing with before. I've put it into full screen mode. I've collapsed the navigator on the left hand side, and I've set the document in edit mode. And what I can see is that there are just 2 buttons at the bottom of the form. Neither one of them has anything to do with changing the workflow step. I can save the document as I make changes, a little like a Word document. You can just save your changes without forwarding it to anybody. Or you can reverse the process. So what you can do is you can send this document back to the draft step. And it's important to remember that wherever you click on reverse, regardless of the workflow step it is in, it will always send it back to the draft step. It won't change any of the data or remove any of the data, but it will be the draft step, and you'll have to go through the workflow process again. Now, I've mentioned this before, but I'll reiterate it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse this form so that it's easy for me to see what sections are available. And I can now see that there is a section 10 for supervisor approval. Now, these questions in section 10, they all need to be answered before you can see anything to do with advancing in the workflow. So the buttons that you need to advance this document in the workflow are dependent on you answering the questions in this section, and they all have to be answered yes. You also have to insert a date. And once you've ticked yes to all of these questions, what you can see now is a complete button, approve with alterations, and an approve button in addition to the 2 that we saw initially. Let's have a look at these 3 buttons that have now appeared. The difference between approve and approve with alterations is fairly straightforward. Approve means approve as is. Approve with alterations means you've changed something and you've approved it. These 2 will push the document forward in the workflow step. And anything that either one of these buttons that you select here will send this document into the pending executive, dean, or director approval step. However, you might not need to click these buttons, and what you have to do with these buttons is hover over them, because descriptors for these buttons actually give you some indication of whether or not you need to press them at all. In this instance, when I click or when I hover over approve with alterations, it says there Do not click this button if section 5 exposure controls is displayed. The same thing is shown if I hover over the approve button. Now, because I've collapsed all of the sections, it's easy for me to see that the exposure controls section is there. And the exposure controls section is visible because within the elevated risks section, section 3, what we've done is we've answered no to all of the questions. Had we answered yes to any of these, the complete button disappears. And we are then forced to push this document forward in the workflow. However, because we've clicked no to all of those questions, section 5 appears. We hover over the button and it says, do not click this button if section 5 is there. There it is. So what we need to do is click the complete button. This will finalize the risk assessment and approve the chemical process for use. It will also trigger an information notification to the person requesting the risk assessment, or the person whose name is in the risk assessor field of the document. The status of the document will change to complete, and this will allow all University of South Australia staff and students to see this risk assessment in the system. UniSA personnel can then utilize the training section of the record to record their use of this chemical process, or they can clone this record. Now, both of these processes will be covered in more detail in a couple of short videos later on. Notifications also get sent out when these buttons at the bottom are pressed. We've mentioned already notifications when complete is pressed, but of course, if this were to be set to yes in the elevated risks and complete was not here, you would have to approve with alterations or approve it, and this would be sent forward to the pending Executive Dean Director. Notifications would automatically go out at this point as well. There's no need to worry or concern yourself about these notifications. They all happen behind the scenes and automatically. A lower level of access than someone who might be... Something else that we need to consider is also who it is that we're logged in as when we're actually looking at a form. We're currently logged in at the level of a supervisor, and supervisors can only see certain buttons. However, if I was logged into this document or having a look at this document in the same workflow step, but instead of a supervisor, I was an executive dean, I would see the same buttons, but in addition, I would be able to reassign this document or archive it. Now, these features or functions are not available at lower levels of access. In the next video, we'll have a look at the buttons available in the pending Executive Dean or Director step.